That, that allows us, even though we're separated by a great ocean and by, what is it, 10 and a half hours, uh, we are able to get together and discuss, see each other live, talk with one another, and work around your word. So we pray for your ministry among us. You promise us that your word will not return to you void. So let your word bear fruit in us today and in the weeks to come. For Jesus' sake, we pray. Amen. Well, I think, only dealt with the so-called sin offering last week, and I want to review what the sin offering is. The sin offering is not not for any particular sin. It's for the removal of ceremonial uncleanness. Um, it has no direct relationship to any particular sin. It has everything to do with removing impurity. So I proposed calling this, and others have done this. I'm not the first or the only one, surely not the only one. I'm not the first to have suggested this, but this is in Leviticus 5 and or in chapter 4 and going through 5 to verse 13. We would call this the purification offering. By the same token, when we come to 6:14, my text reads my heading in my text reads laws for guilt offerings. And I can remember as a teenager reading this material and thinking, well, what's the difference between a sin offering and a guilt offering? And what does that even mean? And it wasn't until I was in my doctoral work and serving as a teacher's assistant, teacher's assistant, in a course on Leviticus, that the professor set me straight. The word that's translated sin offer or guilt offering probably should be translated, and given the context and what you do with this sacrifice, why you make it, should be called a restitution offering. The idea behind the restitution offering is that I have caused you some loss in some way, and I have wronged you by that. So I need to make restitution to you, and I may even have to make restitution to God, because I've used this illustration. Suppose you have a servant girl and you're a grain farmer, okay? And you're in the harvest. The harvest time has come. You're bringing in your grain, and you have two places where you store your grain. One place is where you store the grain that you're going to be able to use either for the family or for selling it for goods that you want to get from somebody else. So that would be one stored mass of grain that you would save. The other stored grain would be for your tithe. For at harvest time, the tithe always belongs to the Lord, and so you've already calculated what the tenth of your harvest is going to be, and so you've pulled that out, and you have put that in a special place where you're reserving it so that you can offer the tithe when the time comes to make the offering. But your wife is making bread every day, because fundamental to all meals, it's like rice in India. You can't have a meal without rice. By the same token, in Israel, you can't have a meal without bread. And so every meal has bread. In fact, bread is the spoon that you eat with. It is the there was another. Oh, it's your plate that you eat on. So you take sauces and put you. It's like your food in India. You take sauces, put them together, and you eat them. Yes. It's the same thing in Israel. You have sauces, and so you mix those sauces with the bread and eat that with the bread. So it's your plate, it's your napkin for wiping off your hands at the end of the meal. It's everything. It's the meal. So basic is bread that the basic word for food in Hebrew is lechem, Lechem, if you're interested. Lechem means bread, but it also means food. So, food, bread is the foundation of every meal. So you've got your grains stored that you're bringing in from the harvest, but you've taken the tenth out, and the first fruit offering, you've taken that out, and you've stored it in a different place. So your wife is making bread, and she makes bread every day. Yes? And you have a servant girl in your home, and your wife says, "Oh, I need some more grain. Go out and get it," because you grind grain every morning so that you have flour ready for tomorrow's baking. Am I making sense to you? Yes. So you send the girl out. She brings in grain, and you grind it and make flour, and you store it for the next day's baking, and that goes on day in, day out. And suddenly you go out to that tithe portion that you've set aside, and you notice that the heap of grain is getting smaller and smaller. And you have to investigate, because the tithe cannot be used for any other purpose than a gift to God. So you go investigate, and you find out that this little servant girl has been going to the wrong pile of grain to get the wheat for grinding each morning. Now, your household has stolen from God. And it's not just that you've stolen from God, you've stolen the tithe. And the tithe belongs to the Lord, as you know. Yes? That's well-known stuff. So what are you going to do about it? Well, you must bring the restitution offering. The ritual is interesting, and we'll talk about this a little bit. Let's read the passage. It really only goes down to 6 verse 7. So verse 14, Leviticus 5:14, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "If anyone commits a breach of faith and sins unintentionally in any of the holy things of the Lord, he shall bring to the Lord as his," and my text reads, this is the Evangelical Standard Version of the Bible, and they get it. They do pretty well with this. This one, they got it right. He shall bring to the Lord as his compensation a ram without blemish out of the flock, valued in silver shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary, for a, now they go back to the word guilt offering. But it's a compensation offering. It's a restitution offering. You have caused someone a loss. In this case, the loss is of the tithe to the Lord. And so you must bring the animal, but you must do more. So look, verse 16, he shall also make restitution. And that's really what this word means, this guilt offering in Hebrew. This is that word, in fact. He shall also make restitution for what he has done amiss in the holy thing, and shall add a fifth to it, and give it to the priest. And the priest shall make atonement for him with the ram of the guilt offering, and he shall be forgiven. So here, if I've wronged God, let me check something right quick. Verse 16. Yeah. So he shall make restitution. So this is the ritual with God. If I have wronged God, I must replace the material, the matter, the stuff that belonged to God, and add a penalty of a fifth to it. Now, Jewish interpreters say you divide the the material into 5 parts, and you add another fifth to it. So that's adding a 20%. I don't think that's the way to think about it. You're making, well, you are making 120% restitution. Because I have wronged you, or the Lord in this case, I owe a fine. I must not only make up what I have wronged God in, namely the loss of the grain of the tithe, but I must add a fifth part to it. Does that make sense to you? My understanding would be, and of course I'm right, and all the rabbis are wrong. That I hope you will see that as a joke. But a fifth part to it would be, I would take it to be, you got 1, 2, 3, 4 parts. Add a fifth part to it, that would be 25%. So I'm not sure whether it's 120 or 125%, but you must make that restitution to God in order to satisfy the demands of this sacrifice. But note the order in the ritual. Verse 15, there's a sacrifice of a ram without blemish out of the flock, valued in silver shekels, according to the shekel of sanctuary, for a guilt offering or a restitution offering. So you're going to make a ram offering. We've asked this question before. I want to see if you remember. Why must this animal be without blemish? What or that's perhaps not the right question to ask. That's a relatively easy question to answer. Let me ask it a different way. What does it mean to the offerer, to the man who's making the sacrifice, to offer a ram without blemish?
He is offering his best of his flock to the
Yes,
Lord,
yes. So what?
so that it's his breeding stock.
Aha, yeah. And that's the crucial thing. You want to be really careful about treating the holy things of the Lord, because if you're not, your flock is going to go down pretty fast. Does that make sense? So by making the sacrifice, you're acting actually in faith that God will sustain, as he promised that he would sustain the well-being of the flocks and herds of Israel as they lived according to his law. So this is the ritual if I wrong God. If I go into chapter 6, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, if anyone sins and commits a breach of faith against the Lord by deceiving his neighbor in a matter of deposit or security, or through robbery, or if he has oppressed his neighbor, or has found something lost and lied about it, swearing falsely, in any of the things that people do and sin thereby, if he has sinned and realized his guilt, he will restore what he took by robbery, or what he got by oppression, or the deposit that was committed to him, or the lost thing that he found, or anything about which he has sworn falsely. He shall restore it in full, and shall add a fifth to it, and give it to him, to whom it belongs on the day he realizes his guilt. Do you notice a difference in the order of the ritual here, going on into verse 6? And he shall bring to the priest as his compensation to the Lord a ram without blemish out of the flock, or its equivalent. When I deal with the Lord, causing him loss, I make the animal sacrifice first, and then I make the restitution. If I've wronged you, I make the restitution first, and then make the sacrifice. Do you follow this? Yes, no? You with me?
Could you repeat, sir?
Okay. If I have caused a loss to God, I make the sacrifice first and then make the restitution.
Sir, that's question.
Yes?
How can God be caused loss?
Well, If the tithe belongs to the Lord, I can't use it for anything else. Does that make sense?
Okay.
But in the illustration I gave, it was used inadvertently. Nobody was malicious in the act. It was just that the servant girl went to the wrong place, got the wrong grain, and you ground it, and it is no longer used as tithe for the Lord. You've robbed the Lord of his tithe, and so you've wronged God. You've caused him loss. So you make the sacrifice first, then you make the compensation. If I wrong another human, I make the compensation first, and then I make the sacrifice. You see the point then? Yes, no? This may be what Jesus is talking about in the Sermon on the Mount. If you bring your offering to the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, go be reconciled to your brother and then come and make your sacrifice. So it may be this sacrifice that's in view when we're in the Sermon on the Mount in that passage. That's in chapter 6, surely. I think it's in chapter 6. So this is the restitution offering. It's the last of the sacrifices. Do you note that there is no sacrifice that's made specifically because you've done something wrong? I'm sorry, let me say it differently. There's no sacrifice that's made that is intended to get forgiveness for some sin. The sin offering doesn't do that. Peace offering doesn't do that. Grain offering doesn't do that. Burnt offering doesn't do that. And now this is the closest we get to it, but I'm not making the sacrifice because I have wronged God. I'm making the sacrifice because I must make restitution for having unintentionally wronged my brother. Now, this is for unintentional sin. And did we talk about that last week? I kind of vaguely think that we talked about that. Unintentional.
No, sir.
Say again?
No, sir.
Yes.
Okay, let me talk to you about it. Go back to chapter 5, verse 1. In chapter 5, verse 1, he gives some examples of unintentional sin. I think we did this. You may remember as we go through it. If anyone sins in that he hears a public adjuration to testify, and though he is a witness, whether he has seen or come to know the matter, yet he does not speak, he shall bear his iniquity. Or if anyone touches an unclean thing, now let me leave it at just that one illustration, verse 1. Now, if you're a witness to a crime and you hear the call for testimony to the court, but you don't give testimony, how is that unintentional? Does that make sense? Especially if you knew that you had information about the crime. There is the case, as we read it, that one might, where was that statement? Though he is a witness, whether he has seen or come to know the matter, how can that be unintentional? And I think we did do this because we talked about
Yes, sir, we have done that.
villages. Yes, you remember. Good. But this is all for this unintentional sin. This is contrasted in the law of Moses with what is in Hebrew, it says biyad ramah. So with the uplifted hand, it's the fist in the face. It's not just an intentional sin, it's a defiant sin. Does that make sense to you? You're not being defiant necessarily in chapter 5, verse 1, because of what we talked about last week. It may be that the family who's involved is very powerful in your village, and your family owes them a large debt, and they can foreclose at any time on the debt. And if you give testimony against the member of their family, they may do that in vengeance against you. Yes? So out of fear, you might not give testimony, but that's not an unintentional sin. The only way we can describe it is in contrast to the other kind of sin that Leviticus talks about, and that's the high-handed sin or defiant sin. I'm going to do this, and I defy God to do anything about it. Is the spirit of defiant sin. Does that make sense to you? Murder is defiant sin. Rape is defiant sin. It's always defiant, and so they are punishable by death. So there's no sacrifice for defiant sin, but for unintentional sin that is non-defiant sin, then there is sacrifice. Now we've come through the 5 sacrifices, and my first obligation in talking about them is to talk about what did they mean for the ancient Israelite who made the sacrifice? What did they mean for the community? How is this all working out in the life of ancient Israel? That's my first responsibility. My first responsibility is not to go to Jesus. Okay. I've got to understand them in their historical, cultural setting first before I do anything else with them. Let's talk about them now in reference to what we said at the very beginning of Leviticus 1. God gave these commandments in the 15th century BC about sacrifice as a handbook of sacrifice for Israel. And he talked about sacrifice from this point all the way through the Old Testament. And then in the New Testament, it talks about sacrifice in the Gospels, for example. But then when we start explaining the work of Christ, we call his work a sacrifice. So what does it mean for us as we think about what Jesus has done in terms of our sin? So in chapter 5, the grain offer, the guilt offering or restitution offering, why did it take not simply a human death, but the death of a person who is both God and man? Why did it take such a person to die on the cross? Why couldn't God just put us on the cross and we would pay the penalty for our sin and we would be all right? Any ideas?
Sir, because we are full of sin and blemish.
That's true, but couldn't I pay for my sin on the cross? If Jesus could pay for my sin on the cross, why can't I? No answers.
It will not meet the God's righteousness or standard when we are sacrificed.
That's true, but why? Well, first, his was a willing sacrifice. He willingly went to the cross for us. So that if you took me to the cross for my sins, I would not go willingly. I would have to be forced into it. So Jesus went willingly to the cross. So it was a willing sacrifice, number one. Number two,
Sir,
yes.
if that was willing, if there were people who were willing, that does mean that would be a sacrifice again.
It could still be a sacrifice, but that's not all that's required. I want you to notice in the so-called guilt offering, or what I'm calling restitution offering, that it's not enough to simply repay what has been taken. You must have more than is paid. Yes? Yes? All right. So 120, 125%, however you parcel that out, a fifth part to it. um, it has to be more than the wrong that you have done. So I have to bring a sacrifice that engage in that costs me more than I would have had to pay if I'd never made the infraction. That makes sense to you? And now we're back to the point that our brother made just a few minutes ago. We are full of sin and wickedness, and there is no amount of suffering that I can undergo that will pay for all of that. Folks, in calculating, I want you to see something here in the text. In thinking about the sacrifice of the restitution offering, I have to pay a lot more than the amount of in the illustration I gave, in the amount of grain that was taken from the tithe. Does that make sense? I have to pay a lot more because I'm giving my best ram in my flock. Yes? Are you with me?
Yes,
Yeah.
sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
So Jesus alone has the capital that he can pay that will exceed anything I can do in suffering. Do you believe that hell is everlasting?
Yes.
Why is it everlasting? Don't we ever pay off our debt? And the answer is the significance of an act is determined by the entity that is wronged in the act. If I betray my wife, that's one thing. And it's bad and it's very serious. She may never trust me again. Yes. In a worst case, she might divorce me for betraying her. Would that make sense to you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. But in sin, I have not betrayed another human being. I've betrayed God. And having betrayed God, I owe an infinite debt. That's why hell is everlasting. Because in hell, if I must go there, I will always be paying the debt, but never paying it off. So why must Jesus be the person who is put on the cross? Because he is not only a man, he is an infinite person. And he has the resources to pay my infinite debt, your infinite debt, and the infinite debt of all who come to him. Does this make sense to you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, brother. I appreciate you responding that way because the one person I can see doesn't move his head. So
I was just writing. Sir, can you repeat those two statements? Just two statements. Sin
Okay.
causes infinite death. That is.
Yeah. Hell is infinite because I have wronged an infinite person, and the penalty must be infinite. So, as the dignity of the entity wronged increases, the severity of the penalty increases. So, if I betray my wife, she might divorce me. If I betray my government, I was in the United States Army for 3 years, and if I betrayed my country during that 3 years as a traitor, I could be put to death. Now we were not at, well, we were at war in Vietnam, but I might have been put to death for that. Does this make sense? All right. All right. Then I'm not betraying my country in sin. I'm betraying my creator when I sin. and he is infinite. And so the penalty that must be assessed against me must be an infinite penalty. Jesus is both man and God. And since he is both man and God, as man, he can die. As God, he can't die. But as man, he can die. But as man, he can't pay. If he's only a man, he can't pay the infinite penalty. But if he is God, he can pay an infinite penalty with no time elapse. Does it make sense to you at all? I don't know what it means when Jesus cried out on the cross, my God, why have you abandoned me? I don't know what he means by that. My guess is it's something we really can't understand. And because of that, God didn't give us any clarification on it. It cannot be that the Father and Son were separated, because they cannot be separated.
Oh man, we have heard so many messages of it, sir.
I know, but that cannot be the case. There can be no division in the divine nature. What you know the word omnipresent. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. What does omnipresence mean?
He is present at all places at all times.
Okay. And equally present in all places at all times. So here is my way of defining omnipresence. Omnipresence of God is that perfection by which, I actually got this from someplace else, is that perfection of God by which he fills the universe with the fullness of his being and transcends it by infinity. We're just discovering that the universe is not 14 billion years old. It's much, much older than that. And yet, God was present when there was no universe.
Sir, definition, please, once again. Omnipresence is perfection of God by which
He fills the universe with the fullness of his being and transcends it by infinity. So the universe is a speck in the fullness of the presence of God. You from time to time see small bits of dust floating in the air. Yes? Do you?
Yes, sir.
One of those little flecks of dust is the universe for God. Are you with me? It's infinite. It's infinitely small. It's so light that it can float on the air, but that's where the universe is in reference to the being of God. So another way of saying it, God, everywhere God is, all of God is there, and God is everywhere. Everywhere God is, all of God is there, and God is everywhere. So Jesus, being an infinite person, not as a man, but as God, he's an infinite person whose value is infinite. And therefore, on the cross, even only the few hours that he was on the cross, even those few hours that he was on the cross had already rendered an infinite atonement to God. Am I making sense to you?
Can you please repeat, sir?
How far back?
Just the statement what you made now.
Jesus on the cross, even for the few hours he was on the cross, suffered all the pangs of hell that would be infinite pangs of hell that we would have to bear in time. He bore them with no time. And the best.
So the question is, in what sense you say this?
I don't know.
Because there may be people, who've been tortured, severely brutally killed. So you said the pain and suffering of hell.
Yeah.
So
Well, why is he so agonized in the Garden of Gethsemane about what's coming? Because he's going to experience the wrath of God against human sin. And it must be an infinite wrath that he experiences. And only an infinite person can bear that. And I'm out at the end of my ability to explain. Nothing more. I can't say anything more that I know would be meaningful. I don't know what else to say. But Jesus bore the fullness of the wrath of God so that for those whom he redeems, there is no more wrath. Thompson, what was that facial expression about? Were you responding to someone, to your wife maybe, or was
yes,
that?
sir.
Okay.
Yes, is here.
I thought maybe you were thinking, oh my, what is this saying? So I wanted to make sure I didn't miss some input here. The issue for us is that he made restitution for us. He lived the righteous life that he required of Israel. He lived the righteous life. And since he is an infinite person, then he gave a perfect righteous life to God as a man on the earth. And he made a perfect, infinite atonement, bearing the fullness of the wrath of God against sin. And God offers that to us to receive by faith. And if we refuse it, then what's left is the infinite wrath of God. And this is why hell must be everlasting. It cannot end. And I cannot think about that long. I can't bear to think about it long. But the restitution offering is telling us what Jesus accomplishes on the cross. He has made restitution for all of our sin and all of the obedience that we should offer. Does that make sense? So none of my obedience earns me anything from God. God owes me nothing for my obedience because Jesus purchased my righteousness for me. So any obedience that I give is my return of thanksgiving to him. But I'm not earning anything from him. This is a good time to perhaps think about the judgment seat of Christ. Have we talked about this yet? I don't think we have because we've just started talking about Jesus. Do you look forward to the judgment seat of Christ?
So I have a doubt clarification.
Okay.
When man sinned, he could have just erased the memory of the creation and he could have started all over again. But what made God to send his son and sacrifice him?
You have opened Pandora's box, brother. Do you know that Pandora's box reference?
Yes, sir.
She was given a beautiful box and told that she could never open it. This is an ancient Greek myth. And when she got curiosity got the better of her, so she opened it and opened up all the evils of the world came out of the box. So you have opened Pandora's box. Let me ask you a series of questions in answer to your question. When God created the world, did he know he was going to put a man and a woman in the world?
Yes, he did knew.
Did he know that he was going to put them in a garden?
Yes.
Did he know that he was going to put the tree of life in the garden?
Yes.
Did he know that he was going to give them put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden?
Yes.
Did he know that he would give them a commandment not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil?
Yes.
Did he know they would eat from the tree?
Yes.
Then why did he do it?
Now
Now,
you close the Pandora's box now.
yeah, we know the evils are out. Now, it's going to get worse, brother. It's going to get worse. I'm sorry. but all God does, why does God do anything?
To show his attribute.
Yeah.
For his
Excellent.
glory and for his own pleasure.
Yeah, to say for his glory is good theology, but to how did you say it, Thompson?
To show his attributes.
Show his attributes. That's
Or
what
manifest.
what glorifying God does. It displays his excellences. So what aspect of the being of God would best be revealed in a world in which he knew humanity would sin?
Grace.
Grace, exactly. And justice. And by the way, grace without justice is not grace. There has to be justice. So the recipients of grace have to have a just basis for receiving grace, but not in themselves. The just basis is in the work of Christ. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Then the whole point of the creation was not to give man and woman a wonderful, happy place to live and enjoy it forever. The whole point was to reveal God's grace. But how can he reveal grace to righteous people? And the answer is he
So,
can't.
if you say this, do you mean that God allowed the sin to happen so that he would reveal grace to them?
Oh, he didn't allow it.
It's how it's how it can be translated, or
he didn't allow it. He planned it. You answered yes to every question I asked. Yes? Did he know he was going to create the earth? Did he know he was going to put man and woman in the earth? Did he know he was going to put a tree of knowledge of life, a tree of life, tree of knowledge of good and evil? Did he know he was going to give them a commandment? Did he know they were going to break it? You answered yes to every one of them. So it must have been his plan.
No, there comes, we shouldn't say this. So we cannot make God the origin of sin.
I'm not making him the origin of sin.
Yeah.
I'm saying
But
that he's using sin for godly purposes.
Not digestible, sir.
So, which means sin could be spiritual.
Well, did God plan Judas's betrayal of Jesus?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
It was predicted in the Old Testament. The man who eats my bread has lifted up his heel against me. So he planned for sin. He's not the cause of it, but he planned for sin, because you can't reveal grace without sin. I told you Pandora's box is open and we can't close it now.
Brother, how can I understand God planned sin?
Well, did he predict the betrayal of Jesus by Judas?
He did, yes, he knew.
So could he have stopped it?
Yes, of course, he could have.
Why didn't he? Because without it, Jesus doesn't get crucified. And if he doesn't get crucified, God can't give grace to sinful people. And without sinful people, he can't reveal grace.
Sir, can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Um, um,
Sorry for all this.
this is always a hot debatable issue. Does God really need sin to display his attributes?
He does to display grace. What's the brief definition of grace that you've been taught?
Yeah.
Unmerited favor.
Unmerited favor. I think I have a better definition of it. Grace is the favor of God shown to those who have forfeited all claim on his favor, but done for the sake of Jesus. But you can't have unmerited favor for people that merit favor. If Adam and Eve obeyed and all of their children obeyed up to this present day, then God couldn't reveal grace in this world. He couldn't. It had to have sin in order for God to reveal grace.
Doesn't it sound like God made Adam sin?
You can say it that way, but the scriptures don't. God plans these things. When God
But
gave
the interpretation is like that, no, sir? When you talk like this, it means to be like that. Like God ordained or
when in Exodus, God gave the law, did he really think they were going to keep it?
Never.
No. When he offered them blessing for obedience, did he think that he was going to be able to bless them for obedience?
No.
Oh. Sin's part of the plan. Now,
sir, if sin is part of the plan, okay, for exhibiting grace. What about in new heaven where there is no sin? So do you say that there is no grace in heaven?
no, we're there. And so we are everlastingly, folks. Why do the angels peer into the world? The scripture says they want to understand what's going on here. Why? Because they've never seen grace in their lives. I don't know whether to take it this far or not, but the angels at one point are called the angels of his power. And one of the standard responses of people confronting angels is to fall on their faces in worship. So it may be that they are the peculiar revelations of the power of God. We are the peculiar revelations of the grace of God, and the angels don't know grace except as they see it in us. And we will be explaining to them for eternity what grace did, what we were, and what God did for us. And there may be, I have this sneaking suspicion that we are only one of many creations of God. He has lots of attributes that we know. In the Westminster Confession, there is a list of about 9 of them. God is a spirit, infinite, eternal, and unchangeable in his being, wisdom, power, holiness, justice, goodness, and truth. So there are 11. But grace was not revealed before this world was created, apparently, as far as scripture is concerned. So maybe there are attributes we don't know about, and there are other creations in which he's revealed those attributes, and we'll be investigating them as they're investigating us. We want to know more. What is this? Who is this God? Our wonderful God, what is he like? What did he do in your world? Does this make sense to you at all? We are going to be the trophies of grace for all eternity. And for all eternity, it will be known that we don't deserve the place where we stand. Now, this is why I wanted to talk about the judgment seat of Christ. Do you look forward to the judgment seat of Christ? You're a little bit unsure, brother.
Yes, sir.
Frankly,
The
Lord.
moment you say judgment seat, a little apprehensive about that statement.
That's a man asked me this 54 years ago, and I said, no, I'm not looking forward to the judgment seat of Christ. He said, I am. And I thought, what's wrong with you? Because all my sin's going to be revealed. Yes. We're going to receive the things done in the body. Yes. So my sin's going to be revealed and my righteousness is going to be revealed. And I'm going to be utterly ashamed before God and the angels. And the answer is, I don't think so. I don't think so. Because the greatest goal that you and I can have, the greatest goal you and I can have is to honor Jesus and his Father. Here's how the judgment seat of Christ will honor Jesus and his Father. All my sin will be revealed. All of it. And I won't feel any shame because I am cleansed by the blood of Christ. This is Hebrews 9, 12 and 13. If the blood of goats and bulls, here Leviticus, if the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer purify to the sanctification of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ cleanse our conscience, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, cleanse our conscience from dead works to serve the living God. So I will be clean at the judgment seat of Christ. The sin must be revealed so that it will be seen that Jesus' sacrifice was absolutely necessary. And it had to be as shameful as it was because of the sin I committed, you committed, we committed. Yes? Jesus will be glorified. And if my goal in all that I do is that Jesus be glorified, I cannot possibly be ashamed at the judgment seat of Christ because I see Jesus being honored even by my sin. Then all my good works will be revealed. And every one of them will be seen to be the work of God in me. Not my work for God, what I did. Here's what I did for you, Jesus. It's what God did for me. And I will see that God is honored because of the work that he did through me. And let me finish. But then he will give me a reward. What will the reward look like? And the answer is, I don't know. But there are some things that we think. Some people are going to get little tiny rewards because they didn't have much work. Yes. Others are going to have massive rewards because of all the service they did. Let me tell you a different story here. In tribal culture, much of tribal culture is a gift-giving culture. And in gift-giving cultures, the head man always gives the best gifts. Would that be true? Yes. So the Bible is a gift-giving culture. India may be a gift-giving culture. I never bring gifts for people in India, and I'm probably shaming you by not bringing gifts, but India is a gift-giving culture. You cannot think of me leaving India without some gift. And so I always come home with something new from India. But God wrote the Bible for a gift-giving culture, and he himself is a gift-giving person. He is the greatest of all beings, therefore his gifts must be the greatest. And when he gives you your reward, you're going to say, but Father, this is entirely out of perspective with anything that I have done. And he will say to you, my child, I know that. but this honors me. Are you with me here? The gift has to be worthy of God. So there will be no shame. And the gift will be the reward will be so perfectly adapted to you that you can't even imagine wanting somebody else's reward. This is so perfect. Do you follow this? The judgment seat of Christ is a time of great hope for us brothers and sisters. So
The problem is the word judgment, sir.
I know, I know, but he's adjudging the work he did in us, not the work that we did for him. Brothers,
Yes.
you know that anything that has been significant in your life of service, you know, looking back, that was God at work. You know that, don't you? Then what can he possibly do to us to reward his work in us, except give us something that honors him and honors his work in us? One of the brothers had a comment, I think. Just a moment. We have only about 3 minutes left.
When you said that it is God who worked in us, so to reward, before that you said it's because of our sin. Don't you feel that when God worked in us, God worked sins?
God worked sins?
Like you said when you sin, it is you, but
Yeah.
when you work for the Lord, it is God.
Yeah. So it's not God doing the sin in me. He can't. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
But there can be chances where people can think when you saying whatever God you have done for the Lord's sake, it is He who does things for you,
Yeah.
and it is God alone who does good things for you. But when it is sin life that we have committed,
Okay.
how do you accept that?
Here's a crucial question to answer your question. What is sin? How do you define sin? And this is crucial.
Unbelief.
You got to get this. Unbelief. Good. Unbelief is sin. Even when I do something good in unbelief, it's sin.
You do good without God. That's what you mean.
Mm-hmm. So the point is then that every time I'm in unbelief and I'm not trusting God, ministry comes up in my fellowship, and I think, oh gosh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to get involved in that. I'm saying, God, you're not big enough. You can't help me get through that. You can't help me serve that way. Does that make sense to you? So I'm not trusting God, and that's sin. The great issue for us is that we've got to have a right definition of sin. Sin is not just doing bad things; it's doing good things without faith. So we're a whole lot more sinful than we thought. So now the outcome of this is then that the plan of God in this creation is to reveal his character as a person of grace. The only way he can do that is that if there are people who deserve no favor from God. The only way he can do that is if they sin. And so God set up the circumstance where Adam and Eve would give a free response. Now, Thompson, would you make a note to ask me next Tuesday? Or this is Wednesday for you, though, or is it Tuesday morning? No, it's Tuesday morning.
Wednesday morning.
It's Wednesday morning. Ask me next week, what is freedom? Because that's tied up in this whole discussion, and I need to define that. So would you remember to ask me that question, what is freedom, next week? because it's
Yes,
time
sir.
to quit right now.
Yes,
So, well, thank you, folks. Let me pray and we'll end. Father, I may well have completely misrepresented you. I think my reasoning is sound with your word. Where I am wrong, please protect these people from it. Where I am right, let it. It's not because I am right, but because your word, because I'm representing what your word is saying. Let that sink into their lives and fill them so that they can walk before you in confidence with hope in their lives. So all these things we ask, Father, because Jesus purchased them for us. So grant us these requests for his sake. Amen. Okay, well, I'll see you next week then. Looking forward to seeing you again.
Thank you, brother.